At 4:52 p.m. on June 7, 2004, a Be on the Lookout notification arrived at the Smoky Ranger Station in the Great Smoky Mountains National Park. Later that night, Ranger Jackson spotted a suspicious Toyota 4Runner parked in the Newfound Gap parking lot. The driver was identified as a white male who immediately seemed very interested in the Ranger's actions. Suddenly, the 4Runner pulled out of its parking spot and drove towards the Ranger's cruiser. What he did next was sketchy. At a medium distance, he stopped his 4Runner and put his hands over the steering wheel, fingers spread on the windshield, as if to show the Ranger he had nothing in his hands. Ranger Jackson, sensing an escalation, reached for his weapon slowly, just in case. He pulled up to the 4Runner, making sure to put his cruiser in the way of the driver's side door, so the suspect would have to lean out his window to talk to the Ranger in full view. The bolo put out earlier had described this man as both deranged and dangerous, and armed to the teeth. The driver of the 4Runner, John Peck, indeed had a 7.26mm SKS assault rifle with a banana clip of 30 or more rounds of ammunition in the SUV. Apparently, 3 days earlier, Peck had used this assault rifle to murder his ex-girlfriend in her college apartment. Even though the woman had a restraining order against Peck, it did nothing to stop him from stalking, harassing, and killing her, which is a sad reality in many of these situations. Peck had put over a dozen bullets into his ex-girlfriend. As law enforcement later learned, Peck had a hit list. It was found with many other names on it, including his ex's mother, his own mother, and his therapist. The same bolo that had been received earlier that day also said that Peck was likely off of his medication and threatened to shoot any law enforcement officer who approached him. After a brief conversation between the two about where Peck could camp, Ranger Jackson decided to send Peck away from the parking lot towards his already patrolling colleague south of the Newfound Gap overlook. Peck followed the Ranger's directions in search of a better campground, and that's when Ranger Jackson had time to radio in what had just happened and warned Ranger Pond, his friend down the road, that this maniac was on his way towards him. Ranger Pond, a former soldier, decided that there was no way he could let Peck enter the woods, as that would give him a tactical advantage over law enforcement, and would additionally put families and children in harm's way around the campsites. So he made the decision to try to stop him in the open road. So Pond set up a roadblock at Collins Creek picnic area, 10 miles down from Newfound Gap. He chose this place because chances are no visitors would be at this area at this time of night. A mere 2 miles further down the road, however, Smokemont Campground would be filled to the brim. Pond activated his cruiser's recording system, called Cherokee Police, and requested SWAT at the scene. At 11:21 p.m., Pond arrived at the place he would make a stand and parked his vehicle in the southbound lane, facing north, so that Peck would be approaching his car in the same lane. With headlights, flashing lights, and a spotlight trained on where Peck would eventually show up, Pond, while waiting for 8 minutes for backup to arrive, put on his vest and prepared to use his M16. At 11:29, 2 SWAT officers arrived on scene. They deployed spike strips and blocked any way for Peck to get off the road or access a trail. Then they took cover on a hillside overlooking the roadway. At 11:30 p.m., an SUV approached from the north, and it was Peck and his 4Runner. The SUV slowed to a stop, and that's when Ranger Pond called for Peck to get out of his vehicle. Almost immediately, Peck threw the SUV in reverse and fired 3 rifle shots at the officers. As his tires squealed and sparks flew up from the errant shots, the officers returned fire. Peck suffered no injuries from the brief shootout, and he turned the 4Runner around and sped up the mountains. That's when Ranger Pond got to his cruiser, radioed in shots fired, and followed Peck up the road. With Rangers closing in on Peck in both directions, he made the decision to use his rifle on himself. Peck's 4Runner slowed with a bang as the fatal shot went off, causing the 4Runner to fall more than 200 feet off a cliff and come to rest in a creek. Peck's body had been thrown from the vehicle, and even through the mangled mess that was his body, The massive fatal self-inflicted gunshot wound was easily seen.